Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is July 15th, 2024, and this is the Daily AI Show. Welcome, everybody. And with us today, we have Jumi, Andy, Beth, and I am Brian. And today, the goal is just to talk about the idea of coding. Who still needs to do it? Who can ignore it? Thank God. And everybody else in between, because it certainly doesn't apply to everybody. But there's been some, not in the last 2, 3 days, but there's definitely been some chatter for some people like Jensen Huang and Andy Summers, I think it is. We'll talk about them. And they've talked about where they think the future of coding is. So the question is the future of coding kind of like when we had to run computers and use the DOS prompt? And then there was Windows and Macs, and the DOS prompt, for the most part, went away. And now maybe I have to use a DOS prompt, the command line. Maybe I have to use that once, twice a year max, because there's just something basically AI stuff with God mode and all the stuff that they had back in the day. You had to run that off the DOS prompts. But other than that, like I don't have to use a DOS prompt. I haven't had to use it for the last probably almost 20, 25 years of my life. So is coding going the same way? That's the concept for the show today. And I'll be happy to kick this off. I don't know who wants to pick up the ball and run with this with the first ideas here.
I want to inject just a little bit of history, which is, for those who don't know, DOS, DOS stands for Disk Operating System. And we can thank Bill Gates for that. Bill Gates is the person who built the original disk operating system that allowed a CPU to talk to via a keyboard to talk to a screen, which was a green screen back then, and also then render images of letters to come back to you so that you could actually interact with the computer. And I should say personal computer, because there were languages, coding languages, well before that. But that was in the PC world. So I am an ancient dinosaur, and I learned at my college basic computer programming. And I mean basic literally as a language. Beginner's all-purpose symbolic instruction code, invented by a guy named John Kameny, who was the president of Dartmouth at that time. And he developed that as a way for simple people like me to be able to actually work with a time-sharing computer system. So was it worth learning how to program in BASIC? I think so. That'll be the posture I take with this all along.
And because I would say too, Andy, like it carries you for years. I mean, there was a long time where that was a good skill to have. If you're going into college this fall and you don't have any coding experience and you don't intend to be a coder, you're going to go into finance or you're going to go into something, right? Does it make sense to learn how to code? Should a little bit of code get you a long way? Is it good to know a few key terms that'll help you get pretty far? Or should you say, yeah, no, I mean, we can see what 3.5 is doing. People are coming out with better and better results out of using Claude's Anthropic as well as others from OpenAI. Is this something where you go, yeah, well, if there's a calculator, just use a calculator?
So I'm going to say that I think actually it's important to know, to learn how to code. And it's so much easier to learn now that some of the reasons to not learn are going away. But I think it's important to begin to understand code as like a language or a culture or like a framework. Right? Like it used to be that you could fix your very old Volkswagen bug yourself if you had like a pamphlet, right? Because it was a fairly simple thing. Now it's very complicated. Like you can't open your engine and be like, oh yeah. I mean, you can know the stuff you're supposed to know, right?
It's the carburetor. Yeah.
But it is like being able to open that and recognize something as correct or funny, or I'm not sure what that's doing. Riley Brown got very excited about creating 3 apps with Cloud Artifact this past weekend. And one of the things that he did after he went through and he created his first app was he then had Claude walk him through each line of code and explain what it was doing. Like that, I think is a really interesting and great opportunity to learn how to code. That doesn't mean that you're like spitting it out, like raw dogging life in Notepad, like just writing the code. I mean, that's not what coders do anymore. But I do think it's important to understand the language enough to understand when it's not a great thing or it is a great thing, and also to understand that it's likely the code we're being given is not the best code, right? Like, so if you're going to charge people for access to something, you might want to run that through coders who can identify that you just left a really big hole for security. But I still think it's important to know.
I think that's a good point too, is that we're not, I'm certainly not, I don't think you guys are either, saying, you know, like, is it necessary to learn code anymore? Okay, well, the asterisk on the end of that, that's not on the end of the title of the show, is that, well, of course, if that's the career path you're going and you want to do code engineering or things like that, or you want to be heavy into the machine learning, if you want to assign and adjust weights to new models and things like that, absolutely. There's, you know, one of these languages is going to rise to the top. I don't know which one it is right now. I know a lot of people still write in SQL and people write in Python and things like that, Java. But those people aside, if we just take the common worker bee, if you will, I think, you know, like you're saying, Beth, it's like, it's important. I would say my knowledge is like, I can look at something, recognize it, and say, oh, because it's already been done, I can duplicate. And so I can go in and copy and paste from this line to this line, move it down. And I have a basic understanding that if I do it before the big brackets, essentially, and I'm using all the wrong terms, I'm sure, I'm not a coder. But if it starts between here and it ends between here, I know I can duplicate this if I want to make another one of these things. But I almost always have to start from something that already exists. To your point, Beth, I can't imagine if somebody said, and start coding, I'd have no idea where to start the process whatsoever. But I can read it, and I can basically understand if this, then that type scenarios and those kind of things. I think they are helpful. I agree with that. Sorry, Jimmy, I think I was cutting you off there at the top.
No, I think you reiterated the main distinction is, if you are getting into computer science, then absolutely, you know, it's not a waste of your time. If you're not going into computer science, that's the real question. And I'm currently leaning towards what these leaders in AI are saying is the learning to code isn't you can use that time to learn other things, particularly interpersonal skills and being able to work into a group and, you know, those soft skills and things like that. The thing that you mentioned about like cutting the knowing enough of coding to be able to cut and paste or move things around and whatnot, I think that's going to be less and less important as AI develops, right? So you in your job or in the kind of work that you're trying to create, AI is going to fill in all of those gaps, right? I've talked about, you know, or we talked about like this being our Lego pieces, right? I see coding as, I need to know the exact process in which this 6 block has been created. Whereas from my point of view, from like no coding or, you know, from a different field, I just need to have enough 6 blocks to build the thing that I want. And I think there will be a larger separation. For example, in data science right now, if you are a data analyst, you really need to learn SQL, right? Not the hardest of coding languages, but you need to learn SQL so you can build your queries so that you are able to go in and, you know, complete that query for, you know, whatever you're trying to grab. But I think that's going to be like a touch point, or that's a great example of where it becomes less important that you know how to do SQL, because all you're doing is you're asking your interface, your AI agent to say, I need to make this query. And if it needs to build a SQL query, then then you're good, right? You don't need to be the one that builds the SQL query. And when you were going into data analysis, you weren't going in to learn how to do SQL. You just did it because you had to do it to get the information that you wanted. If you can get the information that you want, then it's not that important. Do I think it's important that we still have an avid amount of people who are interested in computer science and learning how to, how to build better and better AI and other, supporting computer systems? Absolutely. But I think for the vast majority of people who aren't interested in that, we're going to reach a point very soon that they won't have to be concerned. So if the question is, should you learn coding now? If you're going into school now, the answer might be probably not, or not as much as you think. Now, the transitional period for the people who are already in it, I think it gets a little more gray there because the tools aren't there enough, and you still need to have a large enough skill set or a generalist enough skill set to be able to adapt until they become good enough.
See, now I would say that makes sense from like an Excel or Google Sheets standpoint. Like, do you still need to know how to write a function by hand, right? Like, if this equals this, turn this cell this color, put yes, right? Like whatever you do. I did know that has been like deleted from my brain because I don't need to know that, right? Like that's a quick ask of any AI. But I do think there's more to coding than just calculation or manipulation of data, right? Just give me the first 5 characters of this thing. I think there is a little bit more of again, I'm going to say culture. I like Grimoire, Nick, I call him Grimoire. Yeah, it's just his thing. His name is Nick Dobos. Sorry. He talks about English is the language of prompt gramming. And so what you're learning is to prompt gram with English and with pseudocode. And when I say pseudocode, a lot of people are like, ooh, I don't. And really, that just means using the structure of code, like variables, or this equals that, right? When I say 45-70, I mean it's football language, right? When I say 45-72 punt, I mean this block of text or this action or this sort of thing. That is something that you learn in like coding and being able to do variables or like low code, no code kind of stuff.
So I not necessarily a pushback, but I think
give it to me.
I think that's just an interpretation of or the things that you're talking about are not rooted in coding. Coding uses it, and I'm talking about like logic, critical thinking, troubleshooting. Those are all skills that are generalist skills that are applied in every single field. Logic and things like that are highlighted in coding because it is a structure in which you can learn the various coding languages and things like that. But if you understand those concepts and how to parse through those things, then it isn't taking computer science 101. It isn't taking your C++ course or things like that. I think I do agree with you. It's important that you understand how to process your thought and how to create that flow and understand each stage of how you want your application or end result to be accomplished. Yes, because if you can visualize that, then it becomes easier to troubleshoot any problems, because most of the time it isn't going to be, oh, look, I said one sentence and it figured it out and now it works perfectly and I'll never have to change it again. We already deal with prompt drift now. So, I mean, I think those are always going to be issues and things and troubles that have to be overcome or problems that have to be solved. So if you understand problem solving, that's going to feed towards what you're talking about, is understanding, oh, this is this is the culture, or this is the way they're communicating, right? And that's what it comes down to, is being able to communicate. If you understand, if you can make that handshake protocol and you both understand, you understand what I'm saying? Yes, I understand what you're saying. Okay, cool. Let's continue on from here. You know, those kinds of things. So I think that's where it's, I think that's where it's more that you need to highlight, and less that I want to take computer science 101 or 201 or whatnot.
So to your point about there being other places where you can learn problem solving and logical thinking, if you think about the curricula in a university, if you're going to take a course in logic, it's probably in the philosophy department. And they're talking about linguistic logic as opposed to computer code logic. But computer code logic is a very direct way to learn some of the mechanics of the most rudimentary kinds of processing logic. And one of those concepts, there are important concepts to learn there that don't actually come up in sort of logic courses for the philosophy department, which is a lot more difficult in some respects, in my mind anyway, to learn than code. And one of those concepts is loop. So in computer programming, there's this concept of a loop, which is you kind of set the parameters, and then, the computer has some conditions that it determines, which it can then use to run a series of iterations of that process. And that looping is what accomplishes the dramatic speed and sort of productivity improvements that computer code achieve compared to a human. Now, there's really no need for a loop in conversational logic. In fact, that would probably be a negative. If I kept looping on you and just saying the same thing over and over, that's not a good thing. So I'm going to just go down and assert that in today's marketplace, you don't really need to learn code, because code is going to be generated by AI. But if I were going to be going into university today, I might choose nonetheless to advise my children, for example, to go into the computer science degree, but only with the provision that they also achieve a more liberal arts education by getting clear exposure to all of the other disciplines, because those are going to be really essential to integrating the problem solving and logical thinking that's being delivered by the computer programming curricula into the real world. And that's one of the things that coding graduates are sometimes criticized for. They never spent any time outside of their concentration in the coding development process, and so it was the mindless pursuit of the big salaries that are associated with software engineering, and didn't go abroad and find some other things. So I'm going to give it a plug for a really Augustan gentleman who's actually a Swedish American, Max Tegmark from MIT, who's going to be featured on tomorrow's show, and his book from 7 years ago. But this guy didn't just do computer programming. In fact, he's not a computer science major at all. He's a physics major originally, and now he's a professor of physics. But the scope of his comprehension of multiple disciplines in science and in culture, importantly, Beth, to kind of refer back to something that I think you're importantly referring to, is really bringing together a much more encompassing view of what's happening in the world than just the people who are writing computer code.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great argument for everyone should become a generalist, so that you can touch upon all of those points. Yeah.
And I was going to bring that up in a second. I just said what I was about to say, Jimmy. But before we do, I want to remind people you can go over to the dailyaishow.com. If you're really enjoying this show, if it's the first time you've met us and you just tuned in because you wanted to hear this subject or any of the shows, or you're a subscriber. Either way, you know, always like and subscribe. We appreciate that. But you can go to dailyaishow.com and find our other episodes as well. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which is growing every single week. We only send it out 1 day a week on Sunday mornings. And that newsletter covers even more than this show could possibly cover. So go over to thedailyShow.com. You can also find out about how we are helping companies with consulting and things like that. And when it comes to AI, because we have a lot of companies out there that are asking a lot of questions. They're not really sure how to attack their AI strategy for their business. And we've been helping a lot of people with that. So you can find out about all that on thedailyishow.com. Now, you were talking about a generalist, and I want to, you know, put that against what Justin had said, which was coding basics are always useful. AI might handle low-level tasks, but high-level coding still needs human experts. And I think the most important part here for now. So I agree with you, Justin. And I think that's sort of what the way I look at this too, is it's the for now. So the question, and Justin, if you want to throw it back in the comment, whatever you think here, but it is for now. So if you are just getting into starting your career, and you know, maybe there is more value in being a generalist. We could have said that maybe 20 years ago, that there's a value in being a generalist. Certainly a place for people who want to be experts in a field, who want to be expert coders. That's not going to go away. Somebody has to fix the systems. When AI doesn't do exactly what it's supposed to, and it writes code that produces error over error over error, well, somebody needs to go in and be able to do that, whether that's human plus AI, a different AI tool, whatever the case may be. We will still need those experts, obviously. And so for the people who want to pursue that career path, it probably will be very lucrative, because there'll be less and less people who decide to go into that field. And could be a very great career if that's what you choose to do. But I think I agree a little bit more with like what you were saying, Jimmy, and I don't know if this is what you were saying, Justin, or part of what you were saying, but the idea of being a generalist and getting a breadth of knowledge, like you were saying, Andy, and having an understanding of the basics, but also logical thinking of language. I can tell you, I'm out of the country right now. I do not speak the native language and where I am, and that changes everything. You get real quick. You get to pointing and signs and making heart shapes with your hand to try to figure out how you're going to communicate what it is. It's, you know, but if you have a basic understanding of language, I find that even though it's not, I'm not an expert in the language, I do find that you can start to piece little parts together. And you say, oh, if that's like this, this is like that. And if I put these two together, that makes this word. I think I understand what this sign is telling me. I know which way the metro is going. So it all very, very important stuff, right? So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, but I think that's sort of the way I look at it too, Jimmy. I'm not sure what my daughter wants to go into. You know, I would say she's 13, so she's right at this age where college is just not that far away for her, about 5 years. But we know what 5 years in AI could look like. So what does even the day one of her college look like? It's kind of crazy to think about, right? So not that she's pushing towards coding or anything like that. She talks about architecture a lot, but there probably is a lot to be said about having a general understanding of her discipline plus these other areas so that she's able to interact with AI in the future. Do we want to talk too as well about what Jensen Huang said, as well as I'm going to get the name wrong again. Larry Summers. I don't know why I want to say Andy. Larry Summers as well, because I think those are sort of one of the reasons we decided to do this show, is that there, like I think you said, Jimmy, there are very prominent people out there who are talking about this. It's not just for people at the moment on the Daily AI show who are like, do you need to code? The reality is we have really, really smart people or leading CEOs who are at the forefront of AI, and they're saying, at least in Jensen Huang's statement, you shouldn't need to have to code, because we're responsible for building systems that take care of that for you. That's our job, meaning at Nvidia and other companies. Where you land on that, it depends on the person, but that's his statement on it. What do you guys, as far as what their comments are, what do you guys think?
I think they're talking about from a certain point of view, right? And I think there's a lot of context that's left out of what they're trying to say. So for Jensen, I think what he's saying is sort of what I was talking about earlier, where it's unless you're going to be a computer scientist, you don't have to worry about learning code, because he was saying everybody, before the tagline was everybody should learn to code. Like that's everybody, every field, everywhere, and he's trying to change that narrative to where, no, if you should only have to learn to code if you're going into that field. Otherwise, we'll take care of those other pieces.
Right. And it was referencing that everybody should learn to code. He was speaking to his own history of talking points, and he was like emphasizing that he's making a change in that.
Yeah, exactly. And then Larry, he was, I think, similarly along the same lines, but he was giving the his analogies were more about, or he was just trying to give context or an analogy that people could understand that, hey, you don't need to go down this path if that's not your thing. He's talking more of it from a holistic or systemic kind of viewpoint, because he was talking about, hey, we have people who repair cars. He's using a car analogy, right? I don't need to know how the engine works, just that I need to take it in for repair when it starts to break down. I just need to know how to fill it with gas, those kinds of things. And so they're both similar statements, but I think he was more talking about, hey, AI is going to fulfill up to this point, so you don't need to take care of that point anymore. You just use it instead of knowing the in and outs of how to, strip field your car and put it back together. So that's kind of where he was coming from.
Yeah, I get that. So the other piece of this, based on our conversation here, is it is like, I totally agree with the liberal arts education, and I came out with a theater major from a liberal arts education, and it turns out you should let your kids do that, because I got job offers from every interview I did, because you can identify somebody's objective and make them feel like you're totally supportive and can help them reach it because of what you learned in your theater degree. That said, AI, slight aside, AI is raising the levels of everybody to a certain extent, right? So you want to make sure that you're not focusing on generalism in a way that AI is going to make you look just like everybody else, right? So I can reference philosophical frameworks or structures. AI can teach you anything in like 30 minutes, right? You can sound great. So I would encourage people to the liberal arts thing, or have a like well-rounded thing, but also have a special interest or a specialty in which you dive really deep, because those are the places where you're going to be able to use AI to exponentially expand your own abilities because of the deep level of context that you have. You gonna push back, Jamie?
I would change, yes, a little bit. I would change that from specialty to passion.
Yes.
Right? Because the end goal is not have to work, but want to. And, the whole, if it's something you love, yada, yada. But I think having a passion for a particular thing does make you more successful in that thing.
Awesome.
And, it's not super, it's not super, what's the word I'm looking for? Common. It's not super common in the States for kids to take a gap year. But I wonder if that will start to happen more as more kids start to realize that there is so much value in basically getting out and experiencing the world beyond maybe where high school is, before they decide to attach to maybe a degree or go in a certain direction or whatever. I don't know if AI will necessarily push people to do more of that. Maybe it'll go the other way, but it'll be curious to see how people do that because everybody's saying it here. It's that worldly experience. I think I've mentioned this before, that one of the nicest compliments somebody ever gave me, this person I didn't know, I was just talking about my past and they were talking about what they did. And we were literally meeting for the first time. and she said, "Wow, you're a bit of a Renaissance man." And she wasn't aiming to send me a compliment. It was just a nice thing to say. And the reason is because she was saying you're well-rounded. Wow, you have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. Something that for most of my professional career, I considered to be a demerit, a mark on me, because I didn't stay in aviation like my dad did his whole career. My brother's been in the same sort of field and industry his whole career up to this point. And I didn't do that. So, but as it turns out, that has actually worked to my advantage, because I am able to quickly take off this hat and put on this hat. Even if I haven't done that particular experience or job for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I can quickly remember. And so I mean, obviously AI is going to get smarter and smarter, but what it won't do for any time soon is it won't have a hunch or a feeling. AI is always going to be very literal to this is the research, this is what's in my training set, this is what the answer is. And then I may recreate something different, but it's not a hunch. And so I always talk about, I know about the firefighting and stuff like that, but I do talk about whether it was professionals, that career or whatever, who would say, I can just tell that this is where this is going. And you say, oh, they had a hunch, they had a feeling. No, that's experience. And it's worldly experience. It's experience of seeing so many variations of a particular situation that they were able to get ahead of it. I don't know. I mean, maybe in the future, AI will be able to do that faster than humans are, but I do think there's a lot of value. My whole point to saying that there's a lot of value to going out and getting worldly experience. Maybe that's a gap year. Maybe that's something different in the future. I'm not quite sure.
I want to say yes to generalists, and there's also a need for specialists. And one of the things about code is that you don't end up in a career as a coder being fluent in multiple languages, right? You can probably transition from one language to the next just as readily as we might from one spoken language to another. But you end up specializing. Like I know for a good part of my career, the people who are doing coding for me were working in PHP. And now PHP is kind of falling by the wayside, with the exception of certain applications, like in e-commerce or wherever. But now, Python seems to be a code language of choice. And if you start learning Python, you're not likely to go back and learn PHP or, and so there's a migration around certain industries and certain, developments. I know in AI, Python and R are languages that are used typically, but there are emerging new languages as well that are like React and so on, that are focused on different elements of the system deliverables. So, for example, the front end is React, but the back end is running in a different code language, and the engineer who's doing the back end is not the same engineer who's doing the front end, and they have specializations. So anticipating, if you're going to go into computer coding, which is a certain and valid objective for many people today, especially because technology and computing are really taking the fore here with the advent of AI. If you're going to do that, you really have to kind of look forward, and the professors in a university can help you decide which languages may be most useful depending on what you want to apply yourself to. But you're going to need to specialize as well, even within the domain of coding. And so you'll have a major, you'll specialize in something, but yes, be broad in your accomplishment of understanding of what's going on in the world.
So that's interesting, Andy, because what you're talking about is, do you have to learn to code in as a major in a university? And I was kind of thinking, coming at this from the aspect of, do I need to learn to code in order to move my idea forward? And does it make more sense to try to move your idea forward, right? Like, try it each time. I have an idea that I've been playing with for that I did initially with ChatGPT 3.5, and it wasn't very good, right? But step by step, sort of engaging in the process of moving an idea forward with more and more like skill in the AI or what's possible to do very quickly. And I think that, so if you want to be a coder, yes, you should learn to code, right? If you want, like, if you're going to go to college, you want to get skill and experience in something that's going to give you a really good salary and you're going to be able to work in companies. That's one path. If you have an idea for an app or you have an idea for something that would make it easier for you, probably you don't learn to code, right? That feels a little bit more to me like a little bit of the line.
And look, there's nothing wrong with saying too, like, I'm really good at this and conceptual and thinking down the road, and this other person is really good at coding. And that's what make great teams anyway, is that you don't necessarily overlap each other a ton. You know enough to complement each other, but you let experts be experts and let them do what they're really great at, what they really like doing. I think you said it, Jumi, what you have passion about. It's really, really important. I would only say to the college thing, this is just me, this is Brian's take on it. If you wanted to be a professional coder and you have a child right now, I'm assuming we probably don't have a lot of teenagers watching this, maybe. But if you're a teenager and you want to be a professional coder, you're like, I will go with the flow of the water where AI goes, but that's what I want to do. I just enjoy it. It's a passion of mine. My personal take would be learn how to code in high school, get really good at it. Don't worry about college, get yourself a job, go travel, go see the world, go see what you want, be able to do your job from literally anywhere with a good internet connection. That's becoming less and less and less of a problem with Starlink and stuff like that. Live on a boat, do whatever you want it is. Go see the world, get all that worldly experience, then decide if you want to settle down. And I bet you there'll be a company that'll pay you handsomely for that experience, plus your unique expertise in whatever the code is. Again, just Brian's take on it. I'm not going to dog college, but depends on what you want to do in life, and maybe giving somebody $80,000 when you could just make $80,000 right out of high school, maybe not be necessarily the right route for you. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up today. Don't forget, you can always, like I said, go to the show, to dailyishow.com. This week, we have a couple more topics coming up. Andy already talked a little bit about tomorrow. We're going to be looking at Max Tegmark's vision of AGI 7 years after Life 3.0. Don't know what that is. That's okay. I didn't know what it was either, but Andy's going to help us out tomorrow. It's going to be a great conversation. Wednesday, we have the news. Thursday, we're going to be talking about power. This is a recurring theme on this show, but we're going to be talking about what types of power do we need to lean on? And is fusion really the best shot we have for the future we want with AI? Because there's so much that's going to come about the power resources needed and necessary already. Some of the AI is starting to rival in a few years are going to be rivaling small countries' power. So it's a big problem, perhaps the biggest problem to some future that we may desire with AI as part of our lives is going to be, where does the power come from? So we're going to be talking about that on Thursday. And then Friday, we will wrap it up with our 2-week recap show where we have an opportunity to talk about all the shows. And since I missed 4 out of 5 last week, that will be a fantastic time for me to catch up with all the things that went on with the show that I might have missed along the way. So thanks everybody for hanging out today, and we will see you again tomorrow for what I am sure is going to be a great conversation led by Andy. So we're excited about that. All right, guys, until tomorrow, let me get to the right screen. Bye.
Aloha.